Next up, we have former Lieutenant Governor and current President of the Small Business Association, Brian Calley, here. Sir, it's an honor to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for the invitation to be here, and I don't know whether or not, if you want to pull up you had a couple of slides. It's not that big a deal. Yep, that's it. First, I want to say my compliments to both Director Adjuba and Treasurer Eubanks, both experts with a wealth of experience and knowledge on the things that they just testified about. In fact, with the director and the literally decades of experience in engineering projects in this area where we sit, and many more over in Southeast Michigan, you won't find a person with better engineering knowledge than he has. And with Director Eubanks being a former Snyder appointee, obviously I think very highly of her capability and capacity as well. I want to offer a different perspective, though, on this issue, which deals with just the reality of the decisions that you have to make in the future based on debt decisions that are made today. And I speak from experience in this. I speak from having to literally dig out of a strategy that took a short-term view on using debt to build roads to reach a standard, and once the borrowed proceeds are gone, dealing with the ramifications of what happens after that. This is not my chart. This actually came from the House Fiscal Agency. We don't need to go year by year, but you can see what has happened with the debt over time. So there's been a very disciplined approach toward living within its means and paying down the debt. As the debt gets paid down, it has an impact on debt service. You see this debt service chart, again, not my chart, but I took information from the House Fiscal Report and then showed what that debt service looks like over the next several years. And so we're really at the end here of paying for the borrowing spree that the Engler and Granholm administrations went on. And while it is true that it did result naturally in a short-term improvement in pavement conditions, particularly on the state trunk lines, that improvement, reaching the standard that they were going for, lasted for about 4 years. And the problem is that it leads to an accelerated depreciation of the roads after that, because you get used to a certain amount of spending, right, including borrowed dollars, but then all the borrowed dollars are gone, and then you have to take your current gas tax and registration fee dollars and make loan payments, and it's even less. And while I wouldn't disagree that interest rates are at a historically low level at the moment, using the argument of that is like saying you can't afford to buy a new car because it's on sale. You can't afford not to buy a new car because it's on sale. If you can't afford the payments, then you can't afford the payments. And that's what I really want us to think about, going into this eyes wide open, that it ties the hands of people in the future when there is a permanent ongoing need and you use debt to satisfy a very short-term need. Now, what I'm trying to make, the point I'm making with this slide here is not about net present value of interest costs. We're talking about cash flow here. And more entities get into trouble because of cash flow than get into trouble because of profitability. And so what you're doing is with a bonding program, particularly one as aggressive as this, where you're literally maximizing what current policy allows borrowing to go to, you are taking future maintenance dollars and front-end loading it. Now, when the director says that there'll be less maintenance required on the roads, I believe that to be true. On those roads that get fixed, there'll be less maintenance required on those roads. State trunk lines make up less than 10% of our total roads. So on a percentage of the miles within that 10%, there'll be less maintenance required because those roads get rebuilt. But the department will have to play favorites with those roads because there is still maintenance required. And so what happens, and this is exactly what has happened over the course of the past, is that the roads that are in the best shape get the most attention because those are the ones that can be saved. And it's at the expense of everything else. And so as you transfer cash flow from maintenance to make loan payments, especially those payments that are further out into the future, this cash flow proposition becomes much more complicated. I want to point out too, payment conditions, state versus local. I don't like borrowing, and the SBAM policy is against borrowing without an identified repayment source, regardless of whether it's for state or local. But if you were to do it, the condition of our non-state trunk line roads is much, much worse. And as described by this which comes directly from MDOT. So in the red on the right-hand side, you see the percentage of local roads, and on the left-hand side that are in poor condition, in the left-hand side, the state roads. One more point, and I'd be happy to take a few questions, and that is that it wasn't that long ago when the state transportation resources were in such dire straits that the state was having difficulty even meeting the federal match to draw down the maximum amount. We're a donor state, by the way. Michigan is already a donor state to the rest of the country with our gas taxes, better than it used to be. But even being a donor state, we were unable, partly, actually I'd say substantially, because of debt payments, to draw down the maximum amount that was available to us under our federal match formula. And so that's why the process started of putting general fund dollars into roads to make sure we didn't miss that match. Now, from 2011 on, I believe, and especially after 2015, when very substantial new revenue sources were put into roads, it has taken Michigan out of that scenario where we're in danger of losing, and with the repayment of debt and debt service going down, out of the scenario where federal match is in jeopardy. To add additional insulation for the next, say, 7 years, we also secured an agreement with the federal government where Canadian spending on the Gordie Howe Bridge counts the same way as if Michigan spent on our roads, and therefore could be used as a match to draw down the federal dollars. However, there have been changes in administration on both sides of the Detroit River and both sides of the Canadian-U.S. government since then. And so I would recommend that, given the decision that has been made to move forward with borrowing, that you really stress test the ability of the state to maximize its federal match. As long as the Gordie Howe project is happening and the deal with the feds to use that as the state match is ongoing, it should be fine. But reaffirming that that is still usable would be important, especially as these debt payments ramp up to $300 million a year. But I would also recommend that you go out, say, 10 years, and you consider what happens, or at what point that a downturn in the economy or a change in technology that results in a decline in the revenue sources to the transportation fund would put the state at risk of not being able to maximize the federal match. I know now it seems implausible, but I'm telling you, when I sat in your chair, that is exactly the situation that Michigan found itself in. And a major culprit in that was how much of the current gas tax dollars had to be used to pay loan payments from the past. So I don't disagree interest rates are low. By the way, Michigan is able to take advantage of low interest rates specifically because our balance sheet is so much stronger than it was before. And it makes us an excellent credit risk. But what's being proposed here is taking, at least for this particular fund, taking it literally to the max, and taking it to the max for 3 decades. So I'd ask, as things change over the course of the coming decades, wouldn't it be wise or prudent to leave some room for something to change, to go wrong? If there's inevitable ups and downs in economic activity, or maybe a bigger risk, changes in technology that impact the transportation fund, having the ability to smooth that out with debt service till you come up with something different might make more sense. But after this program is done, that option will be off the table because the state will have charged its credit card to the max. I'll just finish with showing our policy. This policy is not in response to the governor's proposal. This predates the governor's proposal. And as you read that policy, you'll find that the only thing that the Small Business Association of Michigan outright opposes is funding our roads with debt with no identified repayment source. Ironically, had the legislature's general fund appropriation not been vetoed, it would have given us a little bit more leeway to not oppose the bonding program, because it would have showed repayment capacity, designated repayment capacity that did not come from future maintenance dollars. And again, I want to stress the fact that we're talking about cash flow. Interest rates are low, and you can net present value it all day long, but it's still cash flow that is needed for maintenance in the future, which is spent and used today. So that asset, that future cash flow, becomes a future liability instead. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.